So, David, how late were you at the White House Correspondents Dinner last night?
I made it through the whole thing, Margaret.
You did?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, it was quite a moment. Look, I've been to a number of these, and Michelle Wolf's not the first comedian to make some of the, forward type of jokes that were made yesterday, but it was awkward. I was at a table at the Washington Post table with Congressman Mark Meadows, big Trump supporter, very, very hard conservative, and he and his wife were not really reacting, trying to keep a straight face when these things were happening, and so it was, the murmur in the room was notable for the reaction even journalists had to some of the things that were being said.
Because of how harsh some of the jokes were?
I think the focus for journalists, including myself, is that this is supposed to be a celebration, certainly of the work that's done, their student scholarships. It's something that, we're talking about the First Amendment, and that's what is to be celebrated. Sometimes I think these things can go over and sort of overshadow that.
Susan, you used to head the White House Correspondents Association. When the Trump campaign held this rally, which was kind of counter-programming out in Michigan, the announcement said that the Correspondents' Dinner is for the fake news media to toast themselves. And the president said, why would I want to be stuck in a room with a bunch of fake news liberals who hate me? Did last night buttress that narrative? Did it change it at all?
I think anytime you can have a split screen and you have the president attacking the press, and next to it you can have a journalist dinner with a comedian attacking the president in the very critical way the comedian did last night, that is reinforcing a narrative that is not helpful to us. And the White House Correspondents Association does a lot of good work for the journalists who are on the beat every day in terms of access and other issues. But we've had awkward dinners before, no question. But this is a different time. This is a time when this week a poll came out done by Quinnipiac that showed a majority of Republicans say the press is an enemy of the American people, not a defender of democracy. And that is an impression that we need to do everything we can to show that is not true and that is not the case, and that we're motivated not by partisanship but by a search for the truth.
Jonah, you talk broadly about identity politics and populism and nationalism in your book. Where does this piece of it fit in, this narrative about the media?
Yeah, I think, look, I'm not a huge fan of the Correspondents' Dinner. I've been to a bunch of them. I think one of the problems is that it feeds into a narrative, since that's the word of the morning, that is really useful to populists. To say, hey, look, once it started becoming sort of like an East Coast version of the Oscars, with the red carpets and who are you wearing and all that kind of stuff, I think the Washington Press Corps kind of lost track of itself. And I'm someone who has dinged President Trump often for his narcissism. The institutional narcissism that was on display last night from the Correspondents' Dinner, I think, was a gift to President Trump. The crudeness towards Sarah Huckabee Sanders was a gift to the White House. It lets them double down on these elites are persecuting us storyline. And I think it was a really bad note for the Washington Press Corps.
Jamelle, some of the pushback from comedians and others has been, well, the president has made personal attacks on people in the past, and there hasn't been the same sort of horror by people in the administration that was expressed last night. Is that a fair defense, or is this sort of bringing everyone down in terms of what the benchmark for behavior should be?
I think you could say it's a little bit of both. I think it is fair to note that the president is vulgar. Is vulgar, has insulted private citizens, has attacked private citizens. The president famously could not bring himself, or infamously could not bring himself, to condemn white supremacist protesters, which I consider to be vulgar. So given that, it's sort of funny to see defenders of the administration say, well, hold on, these jokes are too much, given who they either work for or who they are defending. I do want to make a larger point about sort of the press and its relationship to the American public and sort of the disdain for the press, which is, I hope we can avoid some presentism here, that the press's problem of legitimacy with the public goes back decades. This is a long-term problem. It is a function both of mistakes made by the press corps and of an active campaign of delegitimization against the press. And so to think that something like this dinner encapsulates or represents the problem, I don't think is quite true. I agree with Jonah's criticisms of sort of the spectacle of it all, but this problem of press legitimacy goes back a long time, and I think we should be careful not to think of it solely in terms of events like this.
David, the president's nominee to run the VA, Ronnie Jackson, his personal physician, withdrew this week amid a number of very detailed allegations about his behavior, drunkenness, etc. The president last night at his rally had this to say. I want to play this soundbite about the senator making some of these allegations. The soundbite's not there. Let me read it to you. John Tester of Montana started throwing out things that he's heard. Well, I know things about Tester that I could say too. And if I said them, he would never be elected again.
He's trying to make this an issue, the way that Tester handled this. But I think the bigger issue here goes back again to Dr. Ronnie Jackson. The amount of unsourced allegations that were sort of put out there, I think, was is now being found to, not all of these things are being found to have been true about what was said about Ronnie Jackson. We don't know the extent of what was true, what wasn't true. But I think Trump's trying to make this an issue for Tester and make it a partisan issue. Even though I think the bigger question was, how much vetting did the White House do about this candidate? And what were his real credentials on management? Beyond sort of even the personal conduct, because this is a doctor who did get high marks from President Obama and his administration, a bipartisan administration, but he doesn't have any management experience. And this is a really troubled agency. And for Trump, it's an important domestic priority. So if he can sort of make this a sort of a gotcha about Democrats sort of trying to undermine him, I think that's what he's going for.
Susan, should we expect the president to be campaigning out in Montana? Does this now change the race?
I'm sure Republicans hope he is, because that's a state that went for him in a big way. But 6 months from next Tuesday is the midterm election. And I think that there are those in the White House who are concerned that the president is not aware of in what peril he stands if the House is controlled by the Democrats after the November midterms, or even the Senate, how his life is going to change in terms of investigations and subpoenas, much less passage of legislation. And I think there is an effort by those close to the president to give him a wake-up call about campaigning in Montana, about adjusting some of his behavior and some of his rhetoric to help endangered Republican candidates in a lot of races where you might not expect Republicans to be in trouble.
Speaking of some populism here, I want to come to both of you on this, but Jamelle, I think it's the first time Kanye West's name has ever been said on Face the Nation, but he and the president had a back and forth this week, the president praising him and saying that Kanye has performed a great service to the Black community by praising President Trump, and that prompted an online exchange about whether Black people have to be Democrats. This is another artist, Chance the Rapper, out saying this. What do we make of this? And I ask you because the president's talking about it.
I think that the best lens to take to this is to use it as sort of a way to begin to understand political dynamics within the African American community. I think there's this idea that because a large majority or the overwhelming majority of Black Americans vote for Democrats, this reflects sort of broad liberalism within the African American community. But it's more that for Black Americans, and this has been true basically during every single period of American political history where they could participate fully or even partially, kind of the central judgment Black Americans are making with regards to the party system is which of the two parties is going to hurt us less. And then voting decisions go from there. And so there are a lot of conservative Black Americans. Their conservatism, I think it's different than white Americans, but they're still conservative. But they don't vote for Republicans in this moment because they don't feel that the Republican Party is looking out for their best interests. 60 years ago, it was the reverse. That's, for me, that's my takeaway. A political science lesson, political history lesson about Black political behavior.
Jonah, what do you make of this?
Well, first of all, I resent having to have a strong opinion about Kanye West one way or the other. Similarly with Shania Twain, right? Who said that she would have voted for Trump, but she's Canadian. And why are you talking about this in the first place? I think one of the problems that we have in our politics now is that not only is our sort of lifestyles being politicized, our partisan affiliation is being invested with huge meaning, but our politics is being lifestylized. The high walls between sort of what is considered sort of the entertainment world, as I think I've said on here before, Donald Trump kind of broke the blood-brain barrier between politics and entertainment. And it seems that everything is now flooding in. And a lot of us just want sort of safe harbors where not everything has to be about either Donald Trump or politics in general. and it doesn't seem that's the way the culture is going.
Talking about it though, because Trump talks about it, I just noted quickly that Trump has 50 million Twitter followers on his personal account. He retweeted the Kanye West signed MAGA cap on that account. The president that same day had said he wanted pictures of Mike Pompeo's visit to North Korea put out in the public, but when those came out, it was the official White House account with only 17 million followers that retweeted that. So I mean, we can see what's on Trump's mind.
It is, and as I said, first time Kanye West has ever been mentioned on Face the Nation.
They're making history.